going to talk about some topics that are very relevant to the discussions that have already occurred today about anticipating the impact of unscheduled outages. But first of all, I'm Rob Priest. I'm a healthcare solutions engineer at Rubrik, but I'm actually not going to talk about Rubrik or technology. I'm going to talk about my career before Rubrik, which was for a long time in the NHS. I worked in the NHS for 24 years, mainly in Manchester, so this is very close for me to come today, very convenient. And some methods that we use in the NHS to focus on the when, not if, and then quantify impact in a way which was very relevant to the board members, and moving away from that 5x5 risk matrix we probably all know and love there to kind of get some traction within the business. But I'm going to start off with two pertinent questions. What is the organization's essential function? What's your organization's essential function specifically? Why does your organization exist? Who depends on those services, and how are they supported or maybe completely enabled by digital systems? I don't have time to get answers from everybody, but we'll move on. And then conversely, what's the impact of those systems being unavailable? Who suffers from that? What are the consequences, and how long could that situation be sustained? And this is the questions I ask myself as an IT lead in the NHS, because obviously we negotiate quite significant outages, and a lot of that came as a surprise, and it might be for you. So this is about methods we used and can be used in different verticals to anticipate that and kind of remove the surprise. But why? And I've got a few film references as we go here. Does anyone know that film? Anyone nodding? Yeah, The Hunger Games. So really, the Hunger Games, the contestants were wished that the odds should be ever in their favour. But if we ask ourselves as cyber defenders, we're trying to protect the continuity of our service. Are the odds necessarily in our favour, especially when measured over a prolonged period? Sarah at the top and different speakers have just spoke about the different threats we face and risks. And the decision I made a long time ago was that no, the odds aren't in my favour, that I can't really guarantee that I can prevent any adverse impacts every minute of every day, every week, and so on. So really, this is why we went down this route. And that's backed by government advice. I think the UK government cybersecurity strategy, written in 2022, otherwise known as 4 prime ministers ago, I think it is now. Still relevant now, but it's kind of focused on enhancing resilience. Like, yes, keep focusing on preventative technologies, but ask ourselves the difficult when, not if questions, and be sure that we're ready to kind of respond and recover in a way that minimises impact of any perceived adverse impacts. And that's obviously underpinned. We talked about NIS and NIST and DORA. So operators of critical national infrastructure, as well as the NHS, are kind of very much looking towards the NCSE CAF as guidance there in terms of that outcomes-based approach. So this is very much relevant to Objective A, managing security risk, and Principle B, risk management, which we'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute. So as I mentioned, this is about techniques affecting healthcare, but you'll see, hopefully, that as we go through this, that the techniques that can very much be applied to different verticals, retail, academia, and so on. But focus on the outcomes-based approach of the CAF. This is about how we kind of assess impact and risk in a way which is very relevant to our organisation, and put that in a language that kind of our organisation and board understand, so that we can actually turn it not into a cyber discussion, but more of an operational discussion and get the right people involved. Another film reference for us here. Anyone know that one? Yeah. So not showing us the money, but showing us the metrics. So the top of the presentation, I talked about your essential function. If it's so important, you're likely gathering metrics about how that essential function is executed. And this is definitely the case in healthcare, that we have metrics gathered all the time in terms of the patients we see, the criticality of those, and the classification and so on. And this is a technique which we use to use that data and repurpose that existing data for the purpose of modelling out risk and impact. So if I think about retail, you're probably very much aware in terms of sales that are occurring, when they're happening, dispatches and so on. The data is probably already in the organisation, and if you have it across a time series, you're already well on your way to be able to create a risk model, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail here. But going back to NHS, all NHS activity, clinical activity, is reported nationally, because it's how NHS organisations like the ones I used to work for get paid, and it's how we're measured about our effectiveness. So using that data, it's actually hundreds of spreadsheets in that that's already available freely. I ingested that into a Power BI model. Shout out to Microsoft for this one. So another free tool I've used to kind of create this dashboard, which evolved over time, which now allows me to have very mature impact-based conversations with clinical stakeholders, again, breaking out of that technology box. And I'll just talk through this dashboard in a bit more detail. So the highlighted bit at the top there, that's a timeline of the event, when the event starts, when it ends, and obviously then how long that will go on. And that automatically pulls through the data that supports the essential function of that organisation for that period. So we can see, and I've selected the trust I used to work for, just Manchester there as an example, and that pulls through the data that's relevant to the essential function. Now, for an acute hospital, the essential function is broadly split into 4 metrics: A&E, emergency admissions, inpatients, outpatients, and diagnostics, things like x-rays and so on. That's the essential function split into 4 different departments. And the way I've done that is because the impact of a cyber event or an outage will be very different across those essential functions. So think of those as your departments of your organisation there and how they could possibly be impacted by that. Then on the right-hand side is the KPIs to do with the performance against those essential functions. Are we seeing patients quick enough versus standard and so on? All relevant because they are the results. You can see how that KPIs change as we model through a scenario. And how we model that scenario is we enable sliders, so then stakeholders of each individual department, when we propose a scenario to them, can actually specify and think about how will it impact them, because there's perhaps nobody more well-informed to kind of assess the impact of them than the people on the ground there at the front line. So last film reference, anyone know that one? I'm showing my age with this one, I think, actually. Sliding Doors. So the film here, the main character, it follows this main character's like parallel timelines based on decisions and events that happened. And that's what we're doing really with a scenario modeler. We have the reality of what occurred with the data, as we've just gone through there, but we can actually then overlay that with different scenarios. And I think this impact's been mentioned a few times already. But I picked this one because this is one I foresaw, basically that all Windows clients and servers were offline following a faulty antivirus update. I feel like the talkers have focused on this heavily now, so I should have changed that. So how would that situation pan out for an organisation? Oh, I've lost. AV guy? No? It is, yeah. I'm on a Mac, it's all right. There we go, we're back, it's all right. Just start again, it's fine. Yeah, didn't anticipate that impact, did I, down that one? Okay, so if we look at that situation, then we can go to our organisation and say, well, okay, what does that mean for us? So we could say that, talk to the IT team initially and say, if this situation pans out for us, how long do you think it's going to take us to respond and recover to that, to get back to those Windows devices working as expected? So let's just say that was 7 days in this example. It is just an example. But then we can go back to each stakeholder in each department and say that, okay, the situation is that you don't have your Windows devices for 7 days, which means you can't access the systems and applications you would normally do for that period. And then we went through, and then it's quite interesting that they have this debate internally, then land on this. So I talked to an operational lead for an accident and emergency, and they said in this situation it would relate to about a 70% delay in them getting patients through the department. So they informed that, and then using the metrics, we can see that changes all of a sudden with that situation. About 5,000 more people wait longer than 4 hours than would have done before. So we can really assess impact and risk in a way that it means something to the business. And then, you can see how that will model out in terms of that parallel timeline I talked about, and how that impacts KPIs such as cancer waiting times, referral to treat times, and so on there. So it's kind of looking at that cyber event, but then how the ramifications to the business. So kind of on time here, just briefly, some of the outcomes that I witnessed from this approach, which hopefully, some ideas there which you could take forward in terms of your risk quantification processes, that it's very much an inclusive process. It wasn't confined to technical people. We involved stakeholders from all across the business that, frankly, hadn't thought about IT outages beyond hours from scheduled in the past. And the output was a common language. The board level, board papers that were submitted as a result of certain risk identifications They weren't about RTO and RPO and other technical acronyms. It was about business impact. And then that was as foundational for any case for changes that we put forward. Next one, deeper understanding. Like I mentioned, a lot of clinical people I work with on the floor, they just didn't really anticipate that IT could be down for days, weeks, potentially months. They have this anticipation that IT will be able to magically fix things in hours rather than days and weeks. And as such, they had local BCP processes, like invariably back to paper, that were designed to withstand and sustain hours rather than days and weeks. So this deeper understanding, this conversation back and forth helped them make their processes more robust and readiness as well. And it was a reusable process. The dashboard, the data, the only thing we need actually is a variable, is the scenario we feed into that. And we don't need to be novelists or Hollywood script writers for that. In fact, we don't need an imagination at all, because we can just cherry pick from real life situations like the CrowdStrike one, which went through there. Oops, sorry. And then last way is, before we can actually minimize any impacts, we're measuring it first. I think measuring is a prerequisite before then identifying where we can make optimizations in our recovery and response process. And with it measured, we know the real difference between shortening that recovery. For example, that was 7 days before. If we shorten that to 5 days and 4 days as a result of our process that we've identified, there's benefits there to hundreds, if not thousands of people. So it's probably worthwhile and measurable. And then lastly, before I close out, is preparedness. If we can anticipate these events and be more prepared, we're going to be more ready, and, well, why not do it? Enjoy the rest of the convention, everybody. Thank you.
Another person who finished a little bit before time, which gives me the opportunity to ask you a question. So one of the things that we've reflected on is the ripple effect of these type of sort of black swan events, if you like. Yeah. So you talked about planning for scenarios, and I think the NHS has been on the receiving end of some very big events, like WannaCry, for example.
Yeah, I've lived through a few, yes.
How do you plan for something that's completely outside of your control from a scenario perspective?
I just observe what's going on around the black swan events, the outages, ransomware, cyber attack. I just don't think, I didn't have the confidence I could stop all of this. So being prepared and making data-backed decisions of scenarios and making people aware of that, it removes people's assumptions and generally enhances the organization's readiness. There's things which you talked about in your opening slide there, the threat vectors, the actors, it's often overwhelming, isn't it? And if we focus exclusively on preventing these, I think we are setting ourselves up to fail to an extent. So we need to be aware of, like, quantify the when, so that everyone's aware of that. Because the answer and the solution may not always be technical. It may be human process as well, which I find quite a lot there. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay, thank you.